My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Not from fear, from pure, crystallized rage. It was 2:47 in the morning when my cell phone shattered the silence of my bedroom. I'd been a light sleeper ever since Richard passed 18 months ago, so I grabbed it on the second ring, my heart already pounding with that primal dread every parent knows. The middle of the night call that means something terrible has happened. "Mom? Mom, are you there?" Jessica's voice came through frantic, choked with sobs. My daughter-in-law, calling me at nearly 3 in the morning. "Jessica? What's wrong? Where's David? Where's Emma?" I was already sitting up, reaching for my robe in the darkness, my mind racing through terrible possibilities. "It's Emma, Mom. Oh, God, Mom, there's been an accident." Her voice broke into what sounded like genuine hysterics, raw and desperate. "We're at the hospital and she needs emergency surgery. They're saying if we don't get her into the OR within the hour, there could be permanent damage. But Mom, the insurance won't cover it because we're out of network and they're demanding payment up front." "Slow down," I commanded, my old executive voice cutting through her panic like a blade. "What kind of accident? What hospital? Let me speak to the doctor." "There's no time," she screamed, and I heard the terror in her voice, or what I thought was terror. "Mom, they need $50,000. They need it wired to the hospital account right now, or they said they'll discharge her without treatment. Please, Mom, please, my baby is dying." And that's when I heard it, a man's voice in the background, low and urgent but perfectly clear. "No, say it's brain swelling, more urgent, and cry harder." Ice flooded through my veins. The sound was faint, muffled, but I'd spent 40 years in boardrooms learning to detect lies, reading people, catching the details others missed. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, my entire body going still. Jessica was still sobbing, still begging, her words tumbling over each other. "Mom, I'm sending you the wire transfer information right now. Please, please don't let my baby die because—" "Which hospital?" I asked, my voice deadly calm now, each word precise. There was the briefest hesitation. "What? I told you. Memorial Grace Hospital, it's in—" "There is no Memorial Grace Hospital in Connecticut, Jessica." I'd done charity work for every major hospital in the state for the past 30 years. I knew them all. "Try again." Dead silence. Then I heard that same male voice hissing in the background. Hang up now, she knows." My granddaughter, Emma, was supposed to be at sleepaway camp in Maine. I'd written the check for it myself 6 weeks ago, handed it directly to the camp director. She wasn't in any hospital. She was probably sleeping peacefully in her cabin right now, completely unaware her mother was using her as bait in some twisted scheme. "Mom, I can explain—" Jessica started, but her voice had changed. The hysteria was gone. Now it was calculated, careful. The voice of someone who'd been caught. I didn't let her finish. I said one word, the same word I'd used to shut down countless bad business deals over my career, the word that meant the negotiation was over. "Never." Then I hung up, blocked her number, and poured myself 3 fingers of Richard's best scotch with hands that had finally stopped shaking. I didn't go back to sleep. I couldn't. I sat in Richard's old study, watching the sun rise through the tall windows, my mind racing through possibilities, connecting dots I'd been too trusting, too loving to see before. How long had she been planning this? Was my son David involved? How many other lies had I believed? At 6:43 a.m., my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Whitmore? This is Detective Sarah Hammond with the Connecticut Financial Crimes Unit. I need to ask you some questions about your daughter-in-law, Jessica Whitmore, and a series of financial transactions we've been investigating. Have you ever had that moment when your whole world shifts? When you realize that the nightmare you thought you were imagining is actually worse than you could have dreamed? That was my moment. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up here, sitting in my study at dawn, talking to a detective about my own daughter-in-law, holding evidence of a betrayal I never saw coming. Because this story doesn't start with a 2:47 a.m. phone call. It starts much, much earlier than that. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 67 years old, and until that phone call, I thought I'd already survived the worst life could throw at me. 18 months ago, I buried my husband Richard after 42 years of marriage. He went peacefully, a heart attack in his sleep. But peacefully doesn't mean easily. We'd built our entire life together in our beautiful estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Our retirement plans. Our dreams of traveling through Europe and spoiling our granddaughter Emma until she was absolutely rotten with love. When Richard died, he left me comfortable. More than comfortable. The life insurance alone was $500,000, not to mention our home, fully paid off and currently valued at $2.3 million, my pension from Parker Brown Pharmaceuticals, where I'd served as VP of Strategic Development for 23 years, and our investment portfolio that Richard had meticulously managed like the engineer he was. I was 65, recently retired, healthy, well-preserved. People often told me I looked 10 years younger, and completely, utterly alone for the first time in my adult life. My son David stepped up beautifully those first few months. He's my only child, 39 years old, and he'd always been such a good boy. He called every single day during those dark weeks after the funeral. He brought Emma, my precious 8-year-old granddaughter, to visit every weekend. His wife Jessica made casseroles, organized the memorial service, helped me sort through Richard's belongings when I couldn't bear to touch his clothes. I was so grateful, truly grateful. I'd raised David to be caring and compassionate, and here was the proof that I'd done something right in this world. "Mom, you don't have to do everything yourself," Jessica would say, gently taking paperwork from my hands with that sweet smile of hers. "Let us help. You've been through so much." Looking back now, I can see exactly when the shift happened. But at the time, I was drowning in grief, clinging to any kindness like a lifeline. It was about 6 months after Richard's funeral when Jessica started mentioning money. Just casually, just in passing, like it was nothing. "David's company is doing layoffs," she mentioned one Sunday afternoon while we were having coffee in my kitchen. "We're a little nervous about job security, you know? The economy and everything." "Emma's school raised tuition again," she said a few weeks later, shaking her head with that worried mother expression. $23,000 a year now for 3rd grade. Can you believe it? It's getting harder and harder to manage. Then, the transmission in my car might need replacing. The mechanic quoted me $4,000. I don't know where we're going to find that kind of money. Each time, I did what any loving mother-in-law would do, what any grandmother who wanted to help her family would do. I wrote checks, a transfer here, a payment there, nothing that seemed excessive at the time. $3,000 for the car, $5,000 when she said they were behind on the mortgage, another $8,000 for Emma's school expenses and new uniforms. David seemed embarrassed when I brought it up. "Mom, you really don't have to do that. We'll figure it out somehow." "Nonsense," I'd say, waving away his concerns. "What good is money if I can't help my family when they need it? Your father would have done the same thing." But the requests kept coming, and they got bigger, more frequent, more urgent. One evening in March, this would have been about a year after Richard died, Jessica came to visit alone. David was working late, she said. Emma was at a friend's house for a sleepover. She sat in my living room, twisted her hands together, and cried. Real tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I don't know how to say this." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so ashamed. I never wanted you to know how bad things had gotten." My heart broke for her. "What is it, sweetheart? What's wrong?" "We're in trouble. Real trouble." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "David's company cut his salary by 30%. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank sent us a foreclosure notice last week. Mom, we could lose the house. We could lose everything." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. David, my successful, hard-working son, losing his home? Emma being uprooted, traumatized? "How much do you need?" I asked immediately. $25,000 would get us current on everything and give us some breathing room, Jessica whispered, like saying the amount out loud hurt her. I swear to you, Mom, we'll pay you back, every penny. We just need time to get back on our feet. I wrote the check that same day, handed it to her and hugged her while she cried tears of what I thought was grateful relief. But that's when things started feeling strange. 2 weeks later, I ran into Linda Harris at the grocery store. She lives in the same development as David and Jessica. We'd met at a few of Emma's school events over the years. "Eleanor, I didn't know you were coming to the party this weekend," she said brightly, loading organic vegetables into her cart. My smile froze. What party? David and Jessica's Easter celebration. Jessica's been telling everyone about the caterer she hired, something about a farm-to-table menu, and I absolutely cannot wait to see their backyard renovation. She's been posting progress photos on Facebook for weeks. That new pool looks absolutely gorgeous. Backyard renovation, pool, caterer, but they were 3 months behind on their mortgage? I made polite conversation with Linda, but my stomach was churning, my mind racing. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I looked at Jessica's Facebook page. We weren't friends on social media. I barely used the platform, but her profile was completely public, open for anyone to see. What I found made me feel sick. Photos from the past 3 months showed expensive dinners at upscale restaurants in Manhattan. A weekend trip to New York City with tickets to a Broadway show, Hamilton, which I knew cost a fortune. Shopping bags from Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue. Jessica posing with a new Gucci handbag, the distinctive logo clearly visible. Emma at what looked like an elite gymnastics facility with equipment that cost more than most people's cars. These weren't the posts of a family facing foreclosure. These were the posts of people living well beyond their means, or living well on someone else's money. I felt foolish, used, but I also felt uncertain. Maybe I was misunderstanding. Maybe these were old photos she was just posting now. Maybe the backyard renovation was just some inexpensive DIY project Linda had misunderstood. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. I called David the next morning, keeping my voice casual. "Hey, sweetheart, how are things going with the mortgage situation? Any relief yet from the bank?" There was a long pause on the other end. Too long. "What mortgage situation, Mom?" My heart started pounding. "Jessica said you were 3 months behind, that the bank was threatening foreclosure." Another pause, even longer this time. When David finally spoke, his voice was tight, confused, almost angry. "Mom, we've never missed a mortgage payment. Not once. What are you talking about?" The world tilted sideways. "David, I gave Jessica $25,000 2 weeks ago to catch up on your mortgage payments." "You what?" His voice exploded through the phone. "Mom, I don't know what she told you, but we're not behind on anything. Business has been great. I just got a promotion last month, not a pay cut. A promotion." We talked for over an hour. He was horrified, angry, confused. He said he'd confront Jessica that night, get to the bottom of this, figure out what happened. That evening he called me back. Jessica had cried, he said. She'd spun a story about being too proud to tell him she'd asked me for help, about wanting to surprise him by paying off their credit cards, about me misunderstanding what she'd said about the mortgage. David wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. She was his wife, the mother of his child. And I wanted to believe her too. Family is family. People make mistakes. Maybe I really had misunderstood. But something had shifted inside me. Some instinct honed over 40 years of corporate negotiations was screaming that something was very, very wrong. In April, Jessica asked me if she could be added to my checking account as a joint holder. "Just for emergencies, Mom," she said with that sweet, concerned smile. "What if something happens to you? God forbid. But what if you have a stroke or a heart attack? We need to be able to access funds quickly to handle medical bills or household expenses. I'd feel so much better knowing we could help you immediately if needed." I'd worked in corporate strategy for 40 years. I'd negotiated multi-million-dollar deals. I'd sat across from people trying to manipulate me, deceive me, take advantage of me. I recognized a power play when I saw one. "I appreciate your concern," I said calmly, "but I have a detailed estate plan already established with my attorney. Medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, everything properly documented. David has all the necessary legal access he would need in an emergency." Jessica's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold, just for a second, just long enough for me to see what was underneath. "Of course, Mom. I was just trying to help." That night, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what Jessica was really up to before she could do any more damage to my family, my finances, or my sanity. I just had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go. I've never been one to act impulsively. 40 years in corporate strategy taught me that emotion without evidence is just noise. So I did what I'd done countless times in boardrooms, facing hostile takeovers and corporate raiders. I gathered intelligence. My neighbor, Patricia Kowalski, had been a family law attorney for 35 years before retiring. We'd become close friends after Richard died. She'd lost her husband Tom years earlier and understood the strange isolation of widowhood, that feeling of being invisible in a world designed for couples. 2 mornings after the joint account conversation, I knocked on her door at 8 a.m. with my financial records organized in a leather folder and a timeline of every single interaction with Jessica written out by hand. Patricia listened without interrupting, her sharp gray eyes scanning the documents I'd meticulously prepared. When I finished laying it all out, she sat back in her chair and sighed heavily. "Eleanor, I've seen this pattern 100 times in my practice," she said, tapping the papers with one manicured finger. "The escalating requests, the sob stories designed to trigger your protective instincts, the attempt to access your accounts directly. This isn't just a daughter-in-law with poor boundaries or financial troubles. This is someone working a system, a con." The word felt like ice water. "A con? Patricia, she's my son's wife. She's Emma's mother. Which makes her the perfect person to exploit you," Patricia said bluntly. "Eleanor, you need to document everything from this point forward. Every text message, every phone call, every request. Don't confront her yet. People like this get dangerous when they're cornered, and I know someone who can help you dig deeper." That's how I met Marcus DeLuca 3 days later. Marcus was a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud and domestic cases. Patricia had worked with him on dozens of divorce cases involving hidden assets and financial deception. He was a compact man in his 50s with tired eyes and the quiet demeanor of someone who'd seen every ugly thing humans were capable of doing to each other. We met at a coffee shop in Stamford, far enough from Greenwich that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be honest with you," Marcus said after I'd explained the situation, his voice low and direct. "Most of my clients already know deep down that they're being defrauded. They hire me to prove it, to give them permission to believe what their gut is telling them. But what you're describing, the pattern, the escalation, the specific attempt to access your accounts, this suggests something more organized than just a financially irresponsible daughter-in-law spending beyond her means." "What do you mean, more organized?" He pulled out a small notebook. "The fake emergency story about the mortgage, the exact amount requested, the manipulation of your emotions through your granddaughter, the attempt to get on your bank accounts. These are techniques, practiced techniques. I need to run a comprehensive background check on Jessica and do surveillance for at least 2 weeks. It'll cost you $3,500. I wrote him a check without hesitation. Over the next 10 days, I went through the motions of normal life while my stomach churned constantly. I had lunch with friends and pretended everything was fine. I attended my book club and barely heard a word anyone said. I took Emma to the park when David dropped her off and studied my granddaughter's face, looking for signs that she knew anything, but she was just a happy 8-year-old girl who loved her grandmother. Every night I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, running through possibilities. What if I was wrong? What if I was being paranoid, letting grief and loneliness twist normal family dynamics into something sinister. But then I'd remember that cold look in Jessica's eyes when I'd refused the joint account. And I knew I wasn't wrong. Marcus called me on day 11. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need to meet, today. I have information you need to see." We met at his office in a strip mall in Norwalk. He handed me a manila folder, and what I saw inside made the room spin. Jessica had gambling debts. $183,000 spread across 4 different online betting platforms and 2 physical casinos, one in New York, one in Atlantic City. The debts had been accumulating for at least 3 years, with the most aggressive collection efforts starting about 8 months ago, right around the time her requests to me had intensified. "There's more," Marcus said quietly, and I looked up at him with my heart hammering against my ribs. "More? How can there possibly be more?" He turned his laptop toward me. Surveillance photos. Jessica meeting a man at a hotel in Stamford, the same man at a restaurant in New Haven, shopping together at an upscale mall in Westchester. The photos were time-stamped, all taken during the past week and a half. "His name is Marcus Chen," my investigator said. 38 years old. He has a history of involvement in insurance fraud schemes, did 18 months in federal prison 4 years ago. They meet at least twice a week, sometimes more. My son had no idea his wife was cheating on him. I felt like I might vomit. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on digital footprints and some social media forensics, at least a year, probably longer." He pulled up more documents. Chen operates what looks like a business out of a storage unit registered as Premier Medical Consulting. "The business is fake, Mrs. Whitmore. The registration, the documentation, it's all designed to look legitimate for financial fraud purposes." "What does that mean?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. "It means when someone needs official-looking paperwork for fake medical emergencies, he can provide it. Hospital names that sound real, wire transfer information that appears legitimate, routing numbers that check out on surface-level verification. He's infrastructure for scams." The coffee I'd drunk earlier rose in my throat. "You think they're planning to scam me with fake medical emergencies?" "I think they've been planning it for months, possibly since your husband died. The boyfriend has the technical infrastructure. Jessica has access to you and emotional leverage through your granddaughter and your son. Mrs. Whitmore, this isn't opportunistic anymore. This is premeditated conspiracy." I excused myself to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, gripping the sides of the sink and staring at my reflection. My face looked gray, older than I'd ever seen it. How had I missed this? How had David missed this? When I returned, Marcus had his laptop open to something else. "I need to show you one more thing." I was able to access some of Jessica's Facebook messages. She left her account logged in on a public computer at the library last week. People get careless. He turned the screen toward me, and I read messages between Jessica and Marcus Chen going back 18 months. My vision blurred as I scrolled through them. "Jessica, she gave me another 8K, easier than I thought. Old widow playbook works every time." Marcus: "Good. Keep working the grandma angle. Elderly women love playing savior, especially recent widows." Jessica: "Next month I'm going to push for account access. If we can get joint account status, we can move serious money before she even notices." Marcus: "Don't rush it. These things take finesse and time. Make her trust you completely first. You've got all the leverage you need with the kid." Jessica: "Her husband just died like 6 months ago. She's vulnerable and lonely. It's literally perfect timing. Perfect timing." They'd been targeting me since before Richard's body was cold in the ground. I sat in Marcus DeLuca's office reading 18 months of messages documenting their entire scheme. How they'd researched my net worth through public property records and my LinkedIn profile from my pharmaceutical career. How Jessica had studied manipulation tactics from online forums. How Marcus had coached her on exactly what to say, when to cry, how to make me feel needed and important while systematically draining my accounts. And the most chilling part, their backup plan to fake a medical emergency involving Emma if everything else failed. Marcus. If the account access doesn't work and she starts getting suspicious, we go nuclear option. Fake hospital emergency with the kid. I've done this setup 6 times with other marks. Grandmothers panic and wire money immediately when they think the grandkid is dying. Jessica. That feels really risky. What if she calls the hospital directly? Marcus. I've got complete fake hospital documentation packages. Letterhead, doctor names, account numbers that route to our accounts but look legit. I've run this con in 3 states. Trust me, grandmother types don't verify. They just panic and pay. By the time they figure it out, we're gone. Jessica. How much can we ask for in a medical emergency scenario? Marcus. Start at $50K minimum. If she questions it, we can adjust down to $35K to seem reasonable. Old people think medical care is insanely expensive anyway, so they don't question big numbers. Plus, out-of-network emergency surgery story is perfect. Makes sense it wouldn't be covered. I read those messages 3 times, each word burning itself into my brain. They were planning to weaponize my granddaughter, to use my love for Emma, my fear of losing her, as the ultimate manipulation tool. What do I do? I asked Marcus, and I barely recognized my own voice. It was cold, flat, emotionless. You have 2 options, he said carefully. Option 1, you go to the police right now with this evidence. They build a case. It could take months, and there's no guarantee they'd prosecute based on messages alone. They might want to wait until an actual crime is attempted. And option 2? You let them make their move. I work with a detective in the financial crimes unit, someone I trust completely. We document everything, we prepare, and when they try to execute this emergency scam, we catch them in the act with enough evidence for serious criminal charges, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny, possibly federal wire fraud. I looked at the messages again, at the callousness, the calculation, the complete lack of regard for Emma's well-being or David's trust, or my grief over losing my husband. They'd looked at a grieving widow and seen a mark, a target, money waiting to be taken. Option 2, I said, and my voice was steel. But I want to be ready for everything. I want evidence that will destroy them in court, and I want them to face real consequences, not just probation or community service. Real consequences. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we need to prepare. And Mrs. Whitmore, I have to warn you, this is going to get very ugly. When you expose them, your son is going to be devastated. Your family will never be the same. Are you absolutely sure you're ready for that? I thought about Richard, about the life we'd built together over 42 years of marriage, about my granddaughter being used as a pawn in a sick con game, about my son being deceived and cheated on by someone he'd trusted with his heart and his child. I've negotiated with corporate raiders and handled hostile boardroom battles for 4 decades, I said quietly. I can handle 2 small-time con artists who thought they could outsmart a grieving old woman. That evening, I met with Patricia again at her house. She'd been reviewing Connecticut's laws on fraud, theft by deception, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse. If you can catch them attempting the fraud, actually trying to get you to wire money under demonstrably false pretenses, the charges could be substantial, she explained, spreading legal documents across her dining room table. Especially if we can prove premeditation and establish a pattern. The messages Marcus found are absolute gold from a legal standpoint. They show intent, planning, conspiracy between 2 parties. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's a crime in progress. What about David? I asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been eating at me. This is going to destroy him, Patricia. Her expression softened with genuine sympathy. Yes, it will. But he needs to know the truth about who he married. Better it comes from you, with evidence he can't deny, than to let this continue until they've drained you dry and disappeared with his daughter. She was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared like I was mounting a corporate acquisition. I made copies of every financial record showing Jessica's requests and my payments. $38,000 total, I discovered when I added it all up. I documented every text message and email. I had Marcus continue surveillance and photographed Jessica's meetings with Marcus Chen. I met with Detective Sarah Hammond from the Financial Crimes Unit and provided her with everything Marcus had found. I changed every single one of my banking passwords and security questions. I set up a separate monitoring account with $60,000 in it, enough to be tempting if Jessica somehow managed to access it, but not enough to bankrupt me. I installed security cameras at every entrance to my home. I contacted Emma's camp director and put specific instructions in writing that under absolutely no circumstances should Emma be released to anyone except David or myself, and that any emergency calls claiming to be from family should be verified directly with me. Detective Hammond was a sharp woman in her mid-40s who'd handled hundreds of elder fraud cases during her 15-year career. Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to know I appreciate you bringing this to us before they succeeded in the big con, she said, reviewing the evidence in her office. The messages alone give us probable cause for an investigation, but you're absolutely right. Catching them in the actual act makes this a slam-dunk case. When they make contact for this medical emergency scam, I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong. What's that? I need you to act scared. Ask questions, but don't refuse immediately. We need them on record making specific fraudulent claims, the hospital name, the dollar amount, the supposed medical emergency. The more details they give, the stronger our case. Can you do that? Could I pretend to be the frightened, confused old woman they thought I was? Could I string along the people trying to rob me blind? Yes, I said. I can do that. Good. If possible, record the call. Get them to repeat everything. Then we'll have conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny, and depending on how they execute the wire transfer, possibly federal wire fraud charges. I went home that afternoon and sat in Richard's study, looking at our wedding photo on the bookshelf. We were so young in that picture, so full of hope and dreams. I'm sorry, I whispered to his image, tears finally coming after weeks of cold rage. I'm sorry I let someone like this into our family, but I promise you, Richard, I'm going to protect what we built. I'm going to protect our son and our granddaughter, no matter what it costs. 2 weeks later, at exactly 2:47 in the morning, my phone rang, and I was ready. The morning after I blocked Jessica's number and hung up on her fraudulent emergency call, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale gold, my mind racing through everything I'd learned, everything I'd prepared for, and everything that was about to happen. Detective Hammond arrived at my home at 8:30 a.m., along with another detective named Robert Chen, no relation to Marcus Chen, she'd assured me with a grim smile when she introduced him. Mrs. Whitmore, we need to move quickly now, Hammond said, setting up recording equipment on my dining room table, like she'd done this 100 times before. Jessica called you at 2:47 a.m. from a burner phone. We traced the number to a prepaid cell purchased with cash 3 days ago at a convenience store in Bridgeport. She's likely panicking right now because you blocked her main number. She and her boyfriend will either go to ground and disappear, or they'll try a different approach to get to you. What do you need from me? We need you to be ready for any kind of contact. She might show up at your door in person. She might have David call you on her behalf. She might try email, social media, even a handwritten letter. Whatever happens, I need you to act normally, concerned but not hostile, confused but not angry. We want her talking, making claims, digging herself deeper. You want me to pretend I don't know anything about the conspiracy? Detective Chen spoke up, his voice calm and professional. We want to see how far she'll take this now that Plan A failed. The attempted scam last night was rushed and sloppy. You caught the boyfriend coaching her in the background, which means they panicked and didn't follow their usual script. People who panic make mistakes, and mistakes give us evidence. Over the next 6 hours, my phone rang 11 times from different unknown numbers. I didn't answer any of them, just as Hammond had instructed. Each call went to voicemail, and each voicemail was Jessica. her voice progressing from panicked to angry to desperate to coldly calculated. "Mom, please pick up. There was a misunderstanding last night. Please let me explain." "Mom, I don't know why you're not answering. Emma is asking for you. She wants to talk to her grandmother." "You know what? This is ridiculous. I was trying to help you understand a serious situation, and you just hung up on me like I'm nobody." "Mom, please, I'm begging you. Just give me 5 minutes to explain what happened." Detective Hammond listened to each voicemail, making notes. She's cycling through manipulation tactics. Guilt, anger, victimhood, desperation. Classic pattern. At 3:15 in the afternoon, David's car pulled into my driveway. My heart sank. Of course she'd use him. Of course she'd send my son to do her dirty work. I watched through the security camera I'd installed as David got out alone, his face drawn and confused and exhausted. When he knocked, I opened the door immediately. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, stepping inside and looking at me like I was a stranger. "Jessica is absolutely hysterical. She says you hung up on her during a medical emergency with Emma last night and then blocked her number. She says she's been trying to reach you all day to explain that there was some kind of misunderstanding, but you won't answer her calls." I led him into the living room, where Detective Hammond and Detective Chen were waiting. David froze when he saw them, his face going pale. "Mom? What's happening? Why are there police detectives in your house?" "Sit down, sweetheart," I said gently, and my voice nearly broke. "We need to talk about Jessica." What followed was the most painful conversation I've ever had with my son. Detective Hammond laid out everything with clinical precision. The surveillance footage of Jessica meeting Marcus Chen at hotels, the messages between them planning to defraud me, the gambling debts totaling over $180,000, the 18-month conspiracy, the affair, the fake emergency call designed to steal $50,000 by pretending Emma was dying. David's face went from confusion to disbelief to horror to devastation as each piece of evidence was presented. He kept shaking his head, kept saying no, like he could make it not true through sheer force of denial. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "No, that's not. She wouldn't. We've been married for 10 years. Emma is—" He couldn't finish the sentence. His hands were shaking. "I'm sorry," I said, taking his hand in mine. "David, I am so sorry." Detective Hammond gave him time to process, sitting quietly while my son put his head in his hands and tried to breathe. Finally, she asked gently, "Mr. Whitmore, we need to ask you some questions. Did you have any knowledge of your wife's gambling activities?" "No." His voice was hollow. No. We have a joint checking account for household expenses and the mortgage, but she has her own personal account for her spending money. I never monitored it. Why would I? She's my wife. I trusted her." He looked at me with devastated eyes. "Mom, did she really try to scam you last night by pretending Emma was in an accident?" "Yes." He made a sound like something inside him had broken. Then he started sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Detective Chen pulled out a file folder, giving David another moment before he spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to verify Emma's location last night. Can you confirm that she's currently at summer camp in Maine?" David nodded, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. He called the camp director, spoke for 2 minutes in a barely controlled voice, then hung up. "Emma's fine. She's been there all week. She went canoeing yesterday and made friendship bracelets. She has absolutely no idea any of this is happening." "Good," Hammond said. "We need to keep it that way for now. Your daughter's safety and emotional well-being are our top priority." Then she dropped the next bomb, and I watched my son's world shatter even further. "Mr. Whitmore, we've been investigating Jessica for the past 3 weeks based on your mother's initial report. In that time, we've discovered that your mother isn't the only victim." David's head snapped up. "What?" Hammond pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. Jessica Whitmore, working with her accomplice Marcus Chen, has been running variations of this scam for at least 5 years. We've identified 4 other elderly victims so far, 3 in Connecticut, 1 in New York. Total verified losses are estimated at over $400,000. I felt the room spin. $400,000. 4 other families destroyed. How is that possible? I whispered. Detective Chen took over, his voice steady and factual. Jessica befriends elderly people, often through legitimate social connections like church groups, volunteer organizations, community centers, gym classes. She builds trust over a period of months, sometimes over a year. Then she starts with small requests for financial help. When they respond positively and show they have resources, she escalates. Her boyfriend, Marcus Chen, provides fake documentation for whatever story they're running: medical emergencies, legal troubles, investment opportunities. By the time the victims realize they've been scammed, Jessica has already moved on to the next target. Why didn't anyone report her before? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Most of them did report it, Hammond said, but without hard evidence, and with Jessica and Chen moving frequently and using different cover stories in different locations, building a prosecutable case was extremely difficult. Your mother provided us with the breakthrough we needed, the messages between Jessica and Marcus Chen, plus the documented pattern of requests, plus catching them in the act of attempting the fraudulent emergency call. She gave us everything we needed to finally stop them. David looked at me with something like awe, mixed with his devastation. You investigated her? You set this up? I protected our family, I said quietly. That's what mothers do. Hammond leaned forward, her expression serious. Mr. Whitmore, this is where we need your cooperation. Jessica doesn't know we have all this evidence yet. She thinks your mother simply got angry and hung up on her. We want to keep it that way for a little while longer. Why? David's voice was harsh, raw with pain. Because we want her to try again. With proper monitoring and recording, we can catch her in another provable fraud attempt that will guarantee convictions in court. But we need you to act normal when you go home. Don't confront her about what you've learned today. David looked at her like she'd asked him to cut off his own arm. You want me to go home and pretend my wife didn't just try to steal $50,000 from my mother by faking our daughter's medical emergency? You want me to sleep next to someone who's been cheating on me and running cons for 5 years? You want me to look at her face and just act normal? I know it's difficult. Difficult? David's voice rose. It's impossible. If I look at her, she'll know. She'll see it in my eyes. I can't do this. I moved to sit beside him, putting my arm around his shoulders like I'd done when he was a little boy with scraped knees and hurt feelings. You're stronger than you think. You're my son, and you're stronger than you know. And right now, we need to finish this. Not just for me, but for every other person they might target next, if we let them get away. David stayed at my house for 3 more hours, while Detectives Hammond and Chen walked him through exactly what would happen next. They'd continue monitoring Jessica's communications and tracking her movements. They'd document every attempt she made to contact me or manipulate the situation. When she and Marcus Chen made their next move, and they would make another move, Hammond assured us, because people like that always did, the detectives would be ready to catch them. What about Emma? David asked, his voice breaking on his daughter's name. What do I tell Emma when all of this comes out? How do I explain to my 8-year-old daughter that her mother is a criminal who used her as bait to steal from her own grandmother? The truth, I said firmly. Age-appropriate truth. That her mother made very bad choices, that we love Emma completely and unconditionally, and none of this is her fault in any way, that she'll always have us no matter what. David left at 7 p.m. to go home to his wife, the woman who'd been systematically destroying our family for profit. I didn't sleep that night either. Over the next 5 days, Detective Hammond called me with updates that made my blood run colder each time. Day 2. Jessica had withdrawn $8,000 in cash from her personal account and met with Marcus Chen at a hotel in New Haven. Surveillance couldn't hear their conversation, but the body language suggested Jessica was stressed and Marcus was trying to calm her down, reassure her. Day 3. Jessica attempted to access my bank account online using old password information she must have seen or memorized at some point. The attempt was logged by the bank's security system and failed. She tried 4 times before giving up. Day 4. Phone records showed Jessica calling 3 of her previous elderly victims, presumably trying to get emergency cash from her old targets now that I'd cut her off. 1 hung up immediately. 1 had a brief conversation that ended badly. 1 threatened to call the police, and Jessica hung up on her. Day 5. Jessica pawned $12,000 worth of jewelry, pieces I now recognized from photos as items I'd seen her wearing over the past year. The jewelry had probably been purchased with money she'd scammed from me or her other victims. "She's desperate," Hammond told me on the phone. "Desperate people make critical mistakes. Stay ready." On day 6, David called me at 11 p.m., his voice tight with tension. "Mom, Jessica just told me she has a job interview in New York tomorrow. She's leaving at 6 in the morning and will be gone all day." "Did she say what company?" "Some consulting firm in Manhattan. She was vague about the details." His voice dropped lower. "But Mom, I don't think there is any job interview. I think she's planning something." Her voice had this edge to it, like she's cornered and dangerous. I immediately called Detective Hammond. Within an hour, they had a plan. "We'll have a team follow her," Hammond said. "We'll see exactly where she goes and who she meets. In the meantime, Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to do something that might feel wrong." "What?" "Unblock Jessica's number. Send her a text message tonight. Tell her you're sorry for overreacting to the call, that you were confused and scared and half asleep. Tell her you want to help if Emma really needs something. You want me to bait her back in. I want to give her an opening. If she thinks you're back on the hook, that you're feeling guilty and vulnerable, she might make another attempt, this time with us ready to document absolutely everything." My hands shook as I typed the message at 11:47 p.m. "Jessica, I'm so sorry I reacted so harshly the other night. I was frightened and confused, and I wasn't fully awake. If Emma truly needs help with anything medical, of course I want to assist in any way I can. Please call me when you have a moment to explain what's really happening. I care about you and David and Emma so much. Mom, Eleanor." I stared at the message for a full minute before I hit send. It felt like betrayal, like lying, like becoming part of their sick game. But it was the right play, the strategic play. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Jessica. Detective Hammond had already coached me on exactly what to do. I answered on speaker, with recording equipment running and Hammond and Chen listening on the line. "Mom?" Jessica's voice was careful, measured, testing the waters. "Thank you so much for texting me. I was so worried about how we left things the other night." "I'm sorry I hung up on you, sweetheart," I said, making my voice warm and grandmotherly and just slightly confused. "I was half asleep, and I got scared. Tell me what's really going on with Emma." And then Jessica made her fatal mistake. Instead of backing off, instead of claiming it had all been a terrible misunderstanding, instead of cutting her losses and running, she doubled down on the con. "Mom, Emma is okay for right now, thank God," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "But the doctors at the camp medical facility are still very concerned about what they found. They're monitoring her closely, but they're saying she might need follow-up surgery when she gets home from camp, and you know how terrible our insurance is. The deductibles are astronomical. I've been so stressed trying to figure out how David and I are going to afford this on top of everything else." She was pivoting, creating a new version of the scam, a softer approach now that the emergency tactic had failed. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, injecting worry into my voice. "The doctors are estimating probably around $30,000 out of pocket after insurance." "I know that's a lot to ask, Mom, and I hate even bringing this up, but David and I are already stretched so incredibly thin financially, and I just—" "Jessica," I interrupted gently. What camp medical facility are you talking about? I spoke to Emma yesterday afternoon when the camp director let her call me. She told me she had a wonderful time canoeing and didn't mention feeling sick or seeing any doctors at all. Silence. Long, stretching, terrible silence. You spoke to Emma? Jessica's voice had changed completely. The sweetness was gone, stripped away like paint peeling off a rotten wall. Yes. The camp director gave me a lovely call to update me on how well Emma's doing. She's perfectly healthy, Jessica. So why don't you tell me what this is really about? I can explain. I'm sure you can, I said, and let my voice harden into the tone I'd used in boardrooms to shut down liars and cheats. Just like you can explain the gambling debts, the boyfriend Marcus Chen, the 4 other elderly people you've scammed over the past 5 years, the 18 months of planning to rob me blind. Should I go on? I heard her sharp intake of breath, heard the panic she couldn't quite hide. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice shook. Yes, you do. And so do the police detectives who've been investigating you for 3 weeks. We have your messages, Jessica. All of them. Every single one. She hung up. Detective Hammond looked at me with grim satisfaction. Perfect. We got everything on tape. Her admitting to a false medical claim about your granddaughter, attempting to solicit $30,000 under completely fabricated pretenses, all while we have documented proof that Emma is healthy and at camp. Combined with everything else, this case is absolutely airtight now. 12 hours later, Jessica Whitmore and Marcus Chen were arrested at a hotel in Stamford, Connecticut, where they'd been packing to flee to California. In Jessica's car, police found $23,000 in cash, fake medical documents with the letterhead of 5 different hospitals, and a laptop containing files that detailed their scams going back 7 years across 4 states. The final investigation would reveal that over 7 years, Jessica and Marcus had defrauded 11 elderly victims of over $600,000 total. And my family had almost been number 12. The day after Jessica's arrest, I sat in Patricia Kowalski's home office, surrounded by legal documents that would determine the future of what remained of my family. Eleanor, I need you to understand something, Patricia said, her voice serious as she spread papers across her mahogany desk. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. The criminal case against Jessica and Marcus Chen will take months, possibly over a year. In the meantime, we need to protect David and Emma legally, financially, and emotionally. That starts today. She'd assembled a team overnight, a criminal attorney named Robert Fitzgerald to work with the prosecutors, a family law specialist named Dr. Jennifer Martinez to handle David's divorce, an estate planning attorney to help me restructure my assets to prevent any future claims or complications. First priority, Patricia said, looking at me over her reading glasses, is protecting Emma. Jessica's parental rights don't automatically terminate just because she's been arrested. Until she's convicted or David gets full custody through family court, Jessica could theoretically still have legal access to Emma, visitation rights, decision-making authority, everything. My blood ran cold. Absolutely not. She used that child as bait. She is not getting anywhere near Emma. I agree completely. We file for emergency custody modification this afternoon. Given the specific nature of Jessica's crimes, using Emma as a manipulation tool in fraud schemes, we have very strong grounds. But Eleanor, you need to prepare yourself for Jessica to fight back hard. She was right, of course. 3 days later, Jessica's attorney, a slick defense lawyer named Richard Brennan, who specialized in making criminals look like victims, filed a motion claiming that Jessica was herself a victim of coercion and abuse by Marcus Chen, that she'd been manipulated and threatened into participating in the schemes, and that separating her from her daughter during this difficult traumatic time would be unnecessarily cruel. When I read the filing, I wanted to throw something across the room. It's a standard defense strategy, Patricia explained calmly when I called her, furious. Claim the woman was controlled and victimized by the man. Sometimes it's absolutely true and legitimate. in this case, based on the evidence we have. It's complete garbage, I finished. I read those messages, Patricia. She was an equal partner. She targeted me specifically. She planned to use Emma. This wasn't some abused woman being forced. This was a calculating criminal. I know, and we'll prove it. But I'm warning you now, this is going to get extremely ugly before it gets better. David was staying at my house, sleeping in his old childhood bedroom. He couldn't bear to be in the home he'd shared with Jessica, couldn't sleep in their bed, couldn't look at their wedding photos without feeling physically sick. He'd taken emergency family leave from his job and spent most days looking shell-shocked, moving through my house like a ghost. Emma was still at camp, blissfully unaware that her entire world was imploding. She had 2 more weeks before she was scheduled to come home. 2 weeks for us to figure out how to tell an 8-year-old girl that her mother was in jail. "How do I do this, Mom?" David asked me one night, sitting at my kitchen table with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. How do I look my daughter in the eye and explain that her mother is a criminal, that everything we had as a family was built on lies and stolen money, that her own mother was planning to fake her death to steal from her grandmother? "Carefully," I said, sitting across from him and taking his hands in mine. "Honestly, but carefully. With a child psychologist present to help her process it. And with more love than you knew you were capable of giving." Patricia had already connected us with Dr. Rebecca Huang, a child psychologist who specialized in helping children cope with parental incarceration and family trauma. We had an appointment scheduled for the week Emma came home from camp. But before we could address Emma's emotional needs, we had to secure her legal safety. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after Jessica's arrest. Jessica had been released on $100,000 bail, money that Marcus Chen's family had apparently posted, which told me everything I needed to know about how deeply involved they were in this entire operation. The day Jessica was released from jail, she showed up at my house. I saw her through the security camera I'd installed weeks ago. She was standing on my front porch, looking thinner than I'd ever seen her, her hair unwashed, wearing the same clothes she'd been arrested in. She looked desperate and dangerous. She rang my doorbell 5 times, then started pounding on the door. I didn't answer. I called Detective Hammond instead. "She's violating the temporary protective order David filed," Hammond said immediately. "Don't engage with her at all. Don't go to the door. Don't respond. I'm sending a patrol car right now." Jessica knew I could see her through the camera. She looked directly at the lens and spoke, and I recorded every word. "Mom, please, I know you're watching. I know you're in there. I need to explain. It wasn't how it looked. Marcus forced me to do things I didn't want to do. He threatened me. He threatened Emma. I was scared for my life. Please, I'm still family. Emma needs her mother. You can't take my daughter away from me." The lies were breathtaking in their audacity. When the police arrived 8 minutes later, Jessica was still on my porch, crying theatrically and claiming she just wanted to talk to her family and explain the misunderstanding. She put on quite a performance for the officers, the concerned mother, the confused wife, the victim of circumstances beyond her control. They arrested her for violating the protective order and held her for 48 hours. The custody hearing itself was absolutely brutal. Jessica's attorney painted her as a devoted mother who'd made mistakes under the controlling influence of an abusive boyfriend. They had no evidence of any abuse, because it didn't exist, but they hammered the narrative anyway, trying to make the judge see Jessica as a victim rather than a predator. Our side presented the messages showing Jessica's active participation and planning, the pattern of fraud spanning 5 years, the specific plotting to use Emma as bait in fake medical emergencies. Detective Hammond's testimony about the scope of Jessica's crimes and the deliberate, calculated nature of the conspiracy. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Patricia Morrison, no relation to my friend Patricia. She reviewed everything with the hard expression of someone who'd seen too much human ugliness and had long ago run out of patience for it. "Ms. Whitmore, Judge Morrison said, addressing Jessica directly in a voice like ice. You are accused of using your 8-year-old daughter as a prop in fraud schemes targeting elderly victims, including your own mother-in-law. You plan to fake medical emergencies involving your child to extort money. Do you have anything to say in response to that specific allegation? Jessica's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, my client maintains that she was coerced by Marcus Chen under threat of... I asked Ms. Whitmore, counselor, not you. The judge's voice could have cut glass. Ms. Whitmore, I'm giving you an opportunity to address this court directly. Jessica stood, tears streaming down her face in what I'm sure she thought was a convincing display. Your Honor, I love my daughter more than anything in this world. Everything I did, every single thing, was to try to provide for her, to give her a better life, to make sure she had opportunities and... By stealing from her grandmother? Judge Morrison's voice was sharp enough to draw blood. By planning to terrorize that grandmother with fake emergencies about your daughter's health? That's your idea of providing for your child and giving her a better life? Jessica crumbled into her chair, her sobs becoming real now as she realized the judge wasn't buying any of it. Judge Morrison granted David full emergency custody with zero hesitation. Jessica was allowed supervised visitation only, 2 hours per week at a monitored facility, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. If Jessica was convicted of the fraud charges, her parental rights would be subject to immediate termination proceedings. David wept with relief when the ruling was announced, but Jessica wasn't done fighting, not even close. 2 days after the custody ruling, her attorney filed another motion claiming that I had unduly influenced the proceedings, that I was manipulating David against Jessica, that I had ulterior motives for reporting her to police, specifically that I wanted to cut Jessica out of any potential inheritance and turn David and Emma against her permanently. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, Patricia said, reviewing the new filing with disgust. None of it will work, but it shows you how desperate and dangerous they've become. Then Jessica's legal team subpoenaed my complete financial records going back 10 years, claiming they needed to establish my pattern of financial manipulation and control over my family. Can they actually do that? I asked Patricia, feeling violated. They can request it. Whether a judge grants the subpoena is another matter entirely. But Eleanor, this is exactly what I warned you about. They're going to make you the villain here. They're going to claim you're a vindictive, controlling mother-in-law who never liked Jessica and saw an opportunity to destroy her and take her daughter. I felt rage building in my chest like a physical thing. I gave that woman tens of thousands of dollars. I welcomed her into my family. I loved her like she was my own daughter. I know, and we'll establish all of that in court. But you need to prepare yourself for character assassination. They'll dig into everything. Your career, your finances, your relationship with David, anything they can possibly twist or use against you. The deposition was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I had to prepare to defend every financial decision I'd made for the past 40 years. But I also had something else to prepare for, something even more important. I was going to testify in the criminal case against Jessica and Marcus Chen. I was going to stand in a courtroom and tell the truth about what they'd done, not just to me, but to all of their victims. The prosecutor, a brilliant woman named Jennifer Wu, met with me 5 times to prepare my testimony. Mrs. Whitmore, you're going to be our star witness, she explained during our first meeting. You're sympathetic, a recent widow, a loving grandmother, a successful professional who was generous with her family and got targeted for it. But the defense is absolutely going to try to make you seem vindictive, controlling, or paranoid. How do I counter that? By being yourself. Calm, factual, unemotional in your delivery. Let the evidence speak for itself. Don't get drawn into emotional arguments or respond to baiting questions with anger. When they try to make you lose your composure, that's when you stay most controlled. She coached me for hours over several days. Mock cross-examinations where she played the hostile defense attorney. Questions designed to twist my words, to make me seem unreasonable, to suggest I'd orchestrated everything out of spite. "Remember," Jennifer said, "you're not just testifying for yourself. You're testifying for the 11 other victims who were too embarrassed or afraid to come forward. You're speaking for every elderly person who's been targeted by someone they trusted." That reframed everything for me. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about justice, real, meaningful justice that might prevent other families from experiencing what we'd endured. 3 weeks before the trial, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten on floral stationery. It was from one of Jessica's other victims, a 72-year-old woman named Helen Ortiz, who'd lost $67,000 to their schemes. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, I wanted to thank you for your courage in reporting Jessica Whitmore and her accomplice. I lost my late husband's entire life insurance policy to their lies, money that was supposed to see me through my retirement. I was too ashamed to tell anyone, even my own children. I thought I was the only one foolish enough to fall for it. When the police contacted me and told me you'd come forward with evidence, I felt like I could finally breathe again. You gave me my dignity back. Thank you for being strong enough to fight when the rest of us couldn't. With deep gratitude, Helen Ortiz." I sat in my kitchen and cried, for Helen, for myself, for all of us who'd been targeted and violated by people who saw our trust as weakness to exploit. Then I called David into the room and showed him the letter. "This is why we're doing this, sweetheart," I told him. "Not for revenge, not even just for us, for accountability, for protection. For all the people who deserve better than to be victimized by someone they trusted." David read the letter twice, then hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "Thank you for being strong when I couldn't be. Thank you for protecting all of us." The night before my deposition, Patricia came over with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Tomorrow is going to be hard," she said, as we sat in my living room. "Jessica's attorney is going to try to rattle you, to make you second-guess yourself, to paint you as the problem. But remember this, you did nothing wrong. You were generous, you were loving, you were a victim. Don't let them rewrite that truth." We drank wine and talked for hours, not about the case, but about life, about our late husbands and how much we missed them, about the strange challenge of navigating the world as widows, about how neither of us had ever expected to be dealing with fraud trials and custody battles in our 60s. "You know what the truly ironic part is?" I said. "I spent my whole career reading people, negotiating, protecting my company from bad actors, and I still got fooled by my own daughter-in-law." "You didn't get fooled," Patricia said firmly. "You loved your family. That's not foolishness, that's being human. The only people who never get conned are people who never trust anyone. And that's no way to live." She was right. The next morning, I put on my best suit, the Dior necklace Richard had given me for our 40th anniversary, and my Rolex. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who'd survived loss, betrayal, and heartbreak, and was still standing. I was ready to fight. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I'd imagined something grand and imposing, like you see in the movies, but this was just a regular Connecticut Superior Court. Fluorescent lights, worn wooden benches, the seal of the state hanging behind the judge's bench. But what happened in that ordinary room was anything but ordinary. The trial of Jessica Whitmore and Marcus Chen began on a gray October morning, exactly 4 months after Jessica's arrest. I sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution table, with David on one side and Patricia on the other. David's hand was cold in mine. He hadn't seen Jessica in person since the day of her arrest. When they brought her in, I barely recognized her. She'd lost at least 20 pounds, her hair hung limp and dull, and she wore a conservative blue dress that was clearly meant to make her look innocent and sympathetic. Her attorney had coached her well. She kept her eyes down, her hands folded, the picture of a remorseful woman who'd made mistakes. Marcus Chen sat beside her at the defense table, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked calm, almost bored, like this was just an inconvenience he'd have to endure before getting back to his real life. I hated them both with an intensity that surprised me. The prosecution's case took 3 days to present. They called Detective Hammond first, who walked the jury through the entire investigation, the surveillance footage, the messages between Jessica and Marcus, the pattern of targeting elderly victims across multiple states. Then they called the other victims. Helen Ortiz took the stand on day 2, and I watched this dignified 72-year-old woman describe how Jessica had befriended her at a church grief support group after Helen's husband died. How Jessica had been so kind, so understanding. How the requests for money had started small, $200 here, $500 there, before escalating to the big con about a fake medical emergency for a cousin's child. I gave her $67,000, Helen said, her voice breaking. That was my husband's life insurance. That was supposed to be my security for the rest of my life, and she took it, and I never saw her again. Jessica kept her eyes down the entire time, but I saw her attorney writing furious notes. They called 3 other victims over the next day and a half. Each story was the same. Befriend a vulnerable elderly person, build trust, escalate requests, execute a final big scam, disappear. The amounts ranged from $45,000 to $98,000. These weren't crimes of desperation. These were calculated, repeated, predatory attacks. On day 4, they called me to the stand. I'd been prepared for this moment for weeks, but my heart was still pounding as I walked to the witness box and placed my hand on the Bible to be sworn in. I looked out at the courtroom and saw David giving me an encouraging nod. I saw Jessica staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger? Fear? Regret? Prosecutor Jennifer Wu approached the witness stand with a warm, professional smile. Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Can you please state your full name and age for the record? Eleanor Catherine Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. And what is your relationship to the defendant, Jessica Whitmore? I looked directly at Jessica for the first time. She's married to my son David. She's my daughter-in-law. Or she was. Jennifer walked me through my background, my 40-year career, my recent widowhood, my financial situation, my relationship with David and Emma. Then she asked me to describe when Jessica first began asking me for money. I kept my voice calm and factual, exactly as I'd been coached. I described each request, each escalation, each story Jessica had told me. The jury members were leaning forward, paying close attention. Mrs. Whitmore, can you describe what happened on the morning of June 12th of this year? Jennifer asked. I took a breath. This was it. I received a phone call at 2:47 in the morning from Jessica. She was hysterical, crying, telling me that my granddaughter Emma had been in a terrible accident and needed emergency surgery. She said the hospital needed $50,000 wired immediately or they would discharge Emma without treatment. And what was your response? Initially, I was terrified. Any grandmother would be. But then I heard something in the background of the call. A man's voice coaching Jessica on what to say. Telling her to claim it was brain swelling. Telling her to cry harder. A murmur went through the courtroom. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine with pure hatred. What did you do then? I asked which hospital. She said Memorial Grace Hospital in Connecticut. But there is no hospital by that name in Connecticut. I've done charity work with every major hospital in this state for 30 years. I knew she was lying. And then? I said one word, never. Then I hung up and blocked her number. Why did you block her number, Mrs. Whitmore? Because I realized in that moment that my daughter-in-law, someone I'd loved and trusted and financially supported, was running a con on me, using my granddaughter as bait, and I wasn't going to be a victim. Jennifer had me confirm that Emma had been safely at camp during the supposed emergency, that Jessica had never mentioned any medical issues before that call, that the entire scenario had been fabricated. Then she played the recording of Jessica's second call, the one where she'd tried again with the follow-up surgery story after I'd unblocked her number. The jury heard Jessica's voice claiming Emma needed surgery. heard me calmly point out that I'd spoken to Emma, who was perfectly healthy, heard Jessica's voice change when she realized she'd been caught. When the recording ended, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Mrs. Whitmore, how much money in total did you give to Jessica Whitmore? $38,000 over the course of approximately 14 months. And did she ever pay you back? No, not $1. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. No further questions. Then came the cross-examination. Jessica's attorney, Richard Brennan, stood up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was a man in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes, the kind of lawyer who made a career out of defending people everyone knew were guilty. Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Or may I call you Eleanor? Mrs. Whitmore is fine. Of course. Mrs. Whitmore, you've had a very successful career, haven't you? Vice President of Strategic Development at a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company? Yes. That's quite impressive. I imagine in a position like that, you had to be very strategic, very calculating. Would you say that's accurate? I saw where he was going. I would say I had to be intelligent and thorough. Strategic, intelligent, thorough. All good qualities. Now, you mentioned you gave my client $38,000. That's quite a lot of money to just hand over without any documentation, any contracts, any agreements. Why would a strategic, intelligent person do that? Because she's my family. Because I trusted her. Or because you could afford to be generous and you enjoyed the control it gave you? Jennifer stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained. Mr. Brennan, rephrase. He smiled. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you enjoyed being needed by your son and daughter-in-law? That giving them money made you feel important after your husband died and you were alone? I kept my voice level. I gave them money because family helps family, not because I needed to feel important. But you admit you were lonely after your husband's death? I was grieving. That's not the same thing as lonely. And when Jessica asked to be added to your bank account for emergencies, you refused. Why was that? Because I already had proper legal structures in place, and because something felt wrong about the request. Something felt wrong, or you wanted to maintain control. I wanted to protect myself. As it turns out, I was right to be cautious. He spent another 20 minutes trying to paint me as controlling, manipulative, bitter about Jessica's relationship with David. But I'd been through worse in corporate negotiations. I stayed calm, factual, refused to be baited into emotional responses. Finally, he shifted tactics. Mrs. Whitmore, you hired a private investigator to spy on my client, didn't you? I hired an investigator to determine whether my concerns about financial irregularities were justified. You had her followed. You invaded her privacy. You accessed her private messages. The investigator found evidence of criminal activity, which he reported to the appropriate authorities. You were building a case against her. I was protecting myself and my family from someone who was defrauding us. Or were you looking for an excuse to get her out of your son's life? I looked at him steadily. Mr. Brennan, I welcomed Jessica into my family. I gave her money when she asked for it. I trusted her with my granddaughter. I had no reason to want her gone until I discovered she was running a criminal enterprise targeting vulnerable elderly people, including me. He tried a few more approaches, but I could see the jury wasn't buying it. When he finally dismissed me, I walked back to my seat with my head high. David squeezed my hand. You were amazing, Mom, he whispered. The prosecution rested their case on day 5. Then came the defense. Jessica took the stand on day 6, and it was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She cried. She trembled. She described Marcus Chen as controlling, manipulative, threatening. She claimed he'd forced her to participate in the scams, that she'd been terrified for her safety and Emma's safety, that she'd tried to get away, but he'd threatened to hurt her family. I never wanted to hurt anyone, she sobbed, looking directly at the jury. I was trapped. I didn't know what to do. Marcus said if I didn't go along with his plans, he'd hurt Emma. He'd hurt David. I was trying to protect my family. It was complete fiction, and we all knew it. But she was convincing. I'll give her that. Jennifer Wu's cross-examination destroyed her. Ms. Whitmore, you claim Marcus Chen threatened you. Did you ever call the police about these threats? I was too scared. Too scared to call police, but not too scared to continue running scams with him for 5 years. He said he'd hurt Emma if I told anyone. I see. Ms. Whitmore, I'm going to show you some text messages. Jennifer pulled up the messages on a screen for the jury. These are messages between you and Marcus Chen. Can you read this one dated March 15th of this year? Jessica's face went pale. It says, Eleanor is perfect, rich widow, lonely, desperate to be needed. She'll give us whatever we ask for. This is going to be our biggest score yet. Did you write that, Ms. Whitmore? Silence. Ms. Whitmore, did you write that message? Yes, but... And this one from April 3rd. I'm going to push for joint account access next week. Once I'm on her accounts, we can drain everything and be in California before she even notices. Did you write that? Marcus made me just answer the question. Did you write it? Yes. Jennifer proceeded to read message after message, all showing Jessica as an active, enthusiastic participant in the schemes. Messages where she bragged about manipulating me. Messages where she planned the fake emergency call. Messages where she calculated exactly how much money she could steal before disappearing. By the time Jennifer was done, Jessica was no longer crying. She was sitting rigid in the witness chair, exposed and defeated. One final question, Ms. Whitmore. You claim you were protecting your daughter Emma by going along with these scams. Can you explain how planning to fake her medical emergency and terrorize her grandmother was protecting Emma? Jessica had no answer. The defense rested the next day. Marcus Chen never took the stand. His attorney was too smart to put him in front of a jury. Closing arguments took most of day 8. Jennifer Wu delivered a devastating summary of the evidence. The 11 victims, the $600,000 stolen, the calculated targeting of vulnerable elderly people, the complete lack of remorse. These weren't crimes of desperation, she told the jury. These were crimes of greed. Jessica Whitmore and Marcus Chen looked at grieving widows and saw dollar signs. They weaponized trust, they exploited kindness, and they left a trail of financially devastated elderly victims in their wake. Eleanor Whitmore stopped them. She was smart enough, strong enough, and brave enough to fight back. But not everyone is Eleanor Whitmore. Not everyone has the resources or the courage to stand up to people like this. That's why you need to hold them accountable. For all the victims who couldn't fight back, for all the future victims they'll target if you don't stop them now. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, I could barely breathe. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of attempted grand larceny in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of theft by deception, guilty, guilty, guilty. On all 23 counts. Jessica collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Marcus Chen showed no emotion at all. David buried his face in his hands and wept, not with joy, but with grief for everything he'd lost. I sat perfectly still, feeling nothing except a cold, hollow sense of justice. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Jessica received 12 years in state prison. Marcus Chen received 15. As they led her away in handcuffs, Jessica looked at me one last time. I couldn't read her expression. Was it hatred? Regret? Understanding that she'd finally met someone she couldn't manipulate? I didn't care anymore. It was over. The night after the sentencing, I sat alone in Richard's study and cried for the first time since the trial began. Not tears of relief or victory, tears of grief for everything we'd all lost. Yes, Jessica was in prison. Yes, justice had been served. But my son's marriage was destroyed. My granddaughter had lost her mother. Our family would never be whole again. The cost of protecting ourselves had been everything. 3 weeks after sentencing, David and Emma moved in with me. David had sold the house he'd shared with Jessica. He couldn't bear to live there anymore, couldn't walk through rooms contaminated by her lies. Emma's bedroom in my house became permanent, not just a place for weekend visits. Telling Emma the truth had been the hardest thing I've ever done. Dr. Rebecca Huang, the child psychologist, guided us through it carefully. We sat Emma down on a Saturday morning in my living room, me, David, and Dr. Huang. Emma was 9 now, old enough to understand, but young enough to be devastated. "Sweetheart, we need to talk to you about Mommy," David began, his voice already shaking. Emma's face went pale. "Is she dead?" "No, baby, she's not dead. But she made some very bad choices, and she's in a place called prison because of those choices." What followed was an hour of careful, age-appropriate truth. We didn't tell Emma about the scams or the conspiracy or how Jessica had planned to use her as bait. We told her that Mommy had hurt people by taking money that didn't belong to her. That Mommy had been lying to all of us. That Mommy would be gone for a very long time. Emma cried like her heart was breaking. Because it was. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked through her sobs. "Is Mommy gone because of me?" "No," I said firmly, pulling her into my arms. "Emma, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Not one single bit. Your Mommy made her own choices, and they were bad choices. But you are loved. You are safe. Daddy and I will always be here for you." "Can I visit her?" David and I exchanged looks. We talked about this with Dr. Huang. "Not right now, sweetheart," David said gently. "Maybe when you're older, if you want to. But right now, you need to focus on being a kid, on being safe and loved and happy." It took months for Emma to stop asking about Jessica. Months of therapy sessions and nightmares and questions we didn't always know how to answer. But slowly, gradually, she started healing. I watched my granddaughter rediscover joy. She joined a dance class. She made new friends at her new school. She laughed more freely than I'd ever heard her laugh before, like some weight had been lifted. David took longer to heal. 6 months after the trial, he was still having panic attacks, still second-guessing every relationship, every interaction, wondering if people were lying to him. He started therapy twice a week, working through the trauma of discovering that the person he'd trusted most in the world had been deceiving him for years. "How do I ever trust anyone again, Mom?" he asked me one evening as we sat on the back patio watching Emma play in the yard. "How do I believe anything anyone tells me after this?" "One day at a time," I said. "One honest interaction at a time. The world has more good people than bad, David. Jessica was an exception, not the rule. Don't let her steal your ability to trust forever." He nodded, but I could see he didn't quite believe it yet. That would take time. As for me, I had my own healing to do. I sold the Greenwich estate 8 months after the trial. The house had too many memories of Richard, of family dinners with Jessica, of the life I'd thought we were living before I discovered the truth underneath. I bought a smaller, beautiful home by the water in Westport, close enough to David and Emma, but a fresh start for all of us. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of waves, and I felt something like peace. I also started volunteering with the Connecticut Alliance for Elder Justice, an organization that helps elderly victims of financial fraud. I gave talks at senior centers about recognizing scams. I shared my story, not for sympathy, but to empower others to protect themselves. At one of these talks, a woman in her 70s approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "My daughter's been asking to borrow money for the past year," she said quietly. "Every month, another emergency. I kept giving it to her because she's my daughter and I love her. But after hearing your story, I think I need to ask some questions." I hugged her. "Ask the questions. Trust your instincts. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. I heard from Helen Ortiz occasionally. She'd used the small amount of restitution from Jessica's seized assets to take a trip to Italy, something she and her late husband had always dreamed of doing. She sent me a postcard from Rome. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at life. Helen." I kept that postcard on my refrigerator. The legal aftermath dragged on for over a year. Jessica's parental rights were formally terminated 9 months after her conviction. She'd be eligible for parole in 8 years. David filed for divorce, which was finalized without contest. Jessica signed the papers from prison. Emma asked about her mother less and less as time passed. On her 10th birthday, we had a party in my new backyard with 12 of her friends. I watched her blow out the candles, surrounded by people who genuinely loved her, and I saw a happy, healthy child who was going to be okay. David started dating again 2 years after the trial, a kind woman named Sarah who worked as a nurse and had a daughter Emma's age. I liked her immediately, but more importantly, I watched how David approached the relationship, slowly, carefully, with healthy boundaries and clear communication. He was learning to trust again. It was painful to watch, like watching someone learn to walk after a devastating injury. But he was doing it. As for me, I learned something important through all of this. I was stronger than I'd ever known. I'd spent 40 years being Richard's wife, being David's mother, being someone's employee or colleague or friend. I'd defined myself through relationships and roles. But when I was forced to stand alone, when I had to be my own protector and advocate, I discovered a strength I didn't know existed. I was 67 years old when this nightmare began. I'm 69 now. I have silver white hair that I've finally stopped dyeing, wrinkles I've earned through decades of laughter and tears, and a confidence that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed me. I look at myself in the mirror now, and I see a warrior, a survivor, a woman who refused to be a victim. Would I change what happened if I could? Would I go back and somehow prevent Jessica from entering our lives? I don't know. Because as much as it hurt, as much as it cost us, it also taught us something invaluable. It taught Emma that she deserves honesty and love. It taught David to value truth over comfort. It taught me that I could stand alone and not just survive, but thrive. I still miss Richard every single day. I still wonder what he would think of how I handled everything. I like to imagine he'd be proud that the man who spent 42 years loving me would approve of how fiercely I protected our family. On the 3rd anniversary of his death, I visited his grave and told him everything. About Jessica, about the trial, about Emma and David healing, about the new house by the water and the volunteer work and the life I'd built from the ashes. "We're okay, my love," I whispered to the headstone. "I kept my promise. I protected them. We're going to be okay." And we are. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. If you've ever been betrayed by family, if you've ever felt foolish for trusting someone who didn't deserve it, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself, I want you to know you're not alone. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Don't let anyone make you feel crazy for recognizing patterns. And remember that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I'd love to hear your story if you're comfortable sharing it in the comments. Have you ever dealt with financial manipulation from family? How did you handle it? And for those watching from around the world, where are you joining me from today? If this story helped you in any way, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. You never know who might need to hear this message. Sometimes we share our pain to prevent someone else's. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 69 years old. I live by the ocean with my son and granddaughter, and I'm stronger than I ever imagined I could be. Thank you for letting me tell you my story.